Well, you know, the one thing we talked about at the beginning, I've been involved in sports for a long time. I grew up in St. Louis, and well, I was going to get to that because when you're born in St. Louis, you're born as a Cardinal fan. It's your birthright, so Cub fans, nothing personal, it's just in the blood. And my father passed at an early age, and then I was nurtured by my uncles who took me to games, they took me to Cardinal games, they took me out with their friends to play ball, and they kind of nurtured that love of sports, and it just kind of, it grew inside me. And so I loved all sports. There wasn't a sport I didn't love. And I'm just fortunate enough that somehow I got into the sports media business starting at the University of Missouri, and maybe I'm not dumb enough to get out, but I'm still doing the sports thing, and I love doing that because it's really what I do, and I just love sports. So again, I've been very fortunate, and as Dave mentioned, I've done a number of things. I've been doing talk radio for 34 years, starting at WHO. I've also been the play-by-play voice of the Bulldogs for the last 8 years, and I've been with the Barnstormers. And one of the things I wanted to share is that I've learned an awful lot behind the scenes that I've been able to take and use in my own personal and professional life. Sports qualities, things that they do in the world of sports. You'll hear a lot of Drake references tonight just because I'm with the Bulldogs a lot. I go to practice, I'm with them on the road. So nothing against the other schools. I love all the schools in the state of Iowa, and I hope they all do well, except when they play Drake. But the one thing I've noticed is that I've got a lot to share in terms of the values that I've learned. We have great coaches in this state, and I'm going to focus in on the big four, Iowa, Iowa State, Drake, and Northern Iowa, just because they're more well-known. I mean, there are a lot of great coaches in the small schools. We don't have time to go through. I wouldn't be able to name all of them anyway. But when you look at the coaches we have in this state, yeah, thank you very much. Well, pop quiz. But you look at, for example, in football, we have Kirk Ferentz at Iowa, Paul Rhodes at Iowa State, Mark Farley at Northern Iowa, and Chris Creighton, who's been followed now by Rick Fox at Drake. In basketball, Iowa's got Fran McCaffrey and Lisa Bluter. At Iowa State, you've got Bill Fennelly and Fred Hoiberg. And you've also got, at Drake, Ray Giacoletti, and you have Jenny Baranchek. And when you look at Northern Iowa, you got people like Ben Jacobson as well as Tanya Warren. These are all people of great integrity. And the reason you know that is the people they bring on their programs. When you look at the kids in our 4 programs here, you see very few problems. I know at Drake, for example, they've had one incident like in the last 7 years. But kids don't get in trouble at these schools. That's because these coaches go into good families and good homes, and they recruit there because they're looking for character people as well as people who can play the game, because they understand how important that is. Coaches know they have to win. Bottom line is they have to win games. That's how they keep their jobs. They don't win games, they're out of a job. One of my best friends is Jim Walden, who was the former coach at Iowa State, but he knew that he didn't win enough games and he knew he was going to be fired because they went 0-11. Still a good person, but you got to win games. But the other thing coaches do is coaches always realize that there's more to sports than just the sports themselves, than just the games. There's a big picture out there because most of these kids are not going to play pro ball. They're going to go on and they're going to get real jobs and have real lives. And that's what these coaches are preparing them for. I remember when I was working with Jim Zabel doing Iowa basketball games back in the mid-'80s, which seems like a long time ago. That was at a time when George Raveling was the coach, and actually I did the last year of George Raveling and the first year of Tom Davis, 84-85. And I remember going up to George Raveling's office inside Carver Hawkeye Arena. And I remember looking at the office and I saw something that took me aback. On his office window, it didn't say George Raveling head basketball coach. It said George Raveling educator. And I went, whoa, that's unexpected. Because I would have figured it said head basketball coach. And it woke me up to the fact that they're educators. They're not in a classroom, they have their own classroom. It's a court somewhere, it's a football field. But they're educators. And then I see people like Norm Parker, who passed away this past January, I should say, of cancer. Great defensive coordinator at the University of Iowa. And I was talking to some of his former players on Out of Bounds. Now, Brian Ferentz is an assistant for the Hawkeyes in the offensive line. He's the son of head coach Kirk Ferentz. And then also, I was talking with Chad Greenway, who's a former All-American linebacker and is now an All-Pro with the Minnesota Vikings. And they both said the same thing. They said Norm was a great coach, funny man. If you ever heard, he was a weekly guest on our Out of Bounds show, and he was hysterical. Great guy. But Norm, first and foremost, thought himself as a teacher to teach life lessons to these kids. Again, knowing they're not going to play pro ball, most of them, but they have to live life. And so he taught them life lessons. So I've learned a lot about these life lessons, and I've tried to put them in my own life, both on a professional level and on a personal level. And I just keep working at them day after day after day, because we all know life is something you just have to keep working at every day. For example, when I talk to Coach Giacoletti, it'll be after a Drake game, and you're always talking about it, or you talk with any of these coaches, you say, all right, what about the next game? They will say, and this is kind of the new buzz phrase, we just have to get better every day. Get better every day. That means working on the fundamentals. That means, for example, working on your footwork if you're in basketball to play better defense, boxing out to get rebounds, football, holding on to your block longer. It's getting better every day. I think of a broadcaster from years back, and I don't know how many of you have heard of him. His name was Gary Bender. He used to work for CBS Sports. He actually worked with John Madden years ago. He wrote a book that was entitled The Call of the Game. It was a book about broadcasting, about his life in broadcasting. It actually was so good it was used as a primer inside journalism schools. That's how good it was. And he wrote in that book, and I'll never forget this, because it hit me right there. He wrote, in broadcasting, you never stay the same. You either get better or you get worse. And I'd never thought of it like that, but he's right. You either get better or you get worse. I have to strive to be better every single day, because with a radio show, I never know if somebody's going to be listening for the first time. I mean, I don't know how many of you listen to the show, but hopefully you will. If you haven't been, you will now. But I've got to be good that day. If you listen to the show and I'm not very good and the show's boring, you're not going to listen to the next day. I have to strive to be better. That's my job, to be better. And don't we all have to be better with everything we do? Dave mentioned that I have 2 sons, 2 stepsons. Well, I have to be better parents every day. I have to try to work at being a better parent every day. Or if you're in the business world, if you're a manager, don't you have to get better productivity every day? Don't you have to get more sales? If you're a manager, don't you have to get better production out of your sales staff? And if you're an employee, don't you have to do a better job of getting it out of yourself that you can learn about your product? Don't you have to get better every day? And I think that's really what we're talking about, getting better every day in everything you do. Some days are a trial, I know, but you have to get better every day. That's the goal. One of the other things, Ray Giacoletti brings this up a lot. This is one of his mantras to his team. He says, you have to control the things you can control. Focus on the things you can control. One of the things we all know is there are a lot of things in this world we can't control. Remember last winter? We couldn't control that. We can't control injuries a lot of times. There are things in the workplace we can't control. What if you have a boss that's on your side, backs you everywhere you go, and then all of a sudden he leaves or she leaves. And then all of a sudden they bring in somebody new who doesn't know you. I had that happen one time, or I was hired and turned out to be somebody who didn't hire me. And so now you have to focus on the things you can't control. Coach Giacoletti, I remember after a few games in which the Bulldogs didn't shoot very well, I'd ask him on the post-game show, what about the free throw shooting? What about the shooting? He'd say, hey, we don't worry so much about that, because that's going to happen. There are going to be games when you're not shooting well. But he'd say, we want to focus on the things we can control. What can we control? We can control defense. We can control rebounding. We can control effort. That's something you can't control, your effort. Ryan Bowen, and I'm sure a lot of you know of Ryan Bowen, who played at the University of Iowa, always tells me when we get him on, he says, I didn't have more talent than the other players on my team. I just was going to outwork them. Nobody would outwork me. And that's the way it worked out, because he ended up being an all Big Ten performer. He went on and played 10 years in the NBA and is currently an assistant coach with the Sacramento Kings. And that's all because of his work ethic, because nobody was going to outwork him. And that's the effort. Those are the things you can't control. And there are things like that at work and at home you can control. Don't worry about those things you can't control, because there's a lot of times there's nothing you can do about them. One area that, I was glad to hear LeBron James talk about this after Game 2 the other day in the NBA Finals. He said, he used the word trust. And he said, I trust my work ethic. As you know, He had a cramp in game one because of the heat, and he didn't play well, didn't play the end of the game. And so he came back at 35 points the other day and led the Heat to a victory in game two. And he said, because I trusted my work ethic. I had Bobby Hansen on my Out of Bounds show recently, and we were talking about his venture. He was a member of the 1992 Chicago Bulls championship team. And we got talking about Michael Jordan, arguably the greatest player ever. And he said one of the great things about Michael Jordan was that he was a great leader. He also told me, by the way, Phil Jackson would not let him win the scoring title, which I was a little surprised to hear, but he said he would not let him win the scoring title. But he also said Michael Jordan trusted his teammates. Perfect example. The Bulls were playing the Knicks in a playoff game, and it came down to the last possession. I forget if the Bulls were tied or they were trailing by one. Jordan takes the ball down the middle, and everybody assumes that he's going to take the final shot because he's Michael Jordan. Instead, he passes it underneath to Bill Wennington, who lays it up for the game-winning shot. And people were stunned by that. Why did he do that? Because he trusted Bill Wennington. He trusted his teammate. The 2007-2008 Bulldogs that won 28 games, when we talked to them after ball games all the time, they would say, hey, I know where my teammates are going to be on the floor. I know the spacing. We know where they're going to be. They trusted each other. And coaches always tell their players, don't try to be a hero. Everybody on the divisional level is a star at their high school. And they've been the ones who've taken the burden. They're the ones who are counted on for the last shot. When you get to college, everybody there has been a star on their high school team. So you've got to trust your teammate. You've got to trust the other guys on the team that they can get the job done too. Now, I was thinking about this in the business world, and I know Bobby brought this up too, that if you're in business, if you manage a company and you have a team, don't you have to trust the other members of your team to get the job done? Because you can't do it all yourself. Hopefully, you won't have to do it all yourself. But the other thing I was thinking about, if you're in sales, first of all, you have to trust your product. You have to trust that you know what your product is all about. But the main thing I would think in sales with trust is, don't you have to get the customers to trust you? I mean, that's your job. You may make one sale, but if you haven't sold that individual, you won't get another sale. You have to make them trust you. Get them to believe in you, that you'll deliver in customer service. You'll go over and beyond so they can trust you, so that the next time they will come back to you. And it's all about trust. And I mentioned in a personal situation, I have 2 stepsons. I had to get them to learn to trust me because it's a personal situation. They have to trust me. And so that's where trust is so extremely important when it comes to sports, but beyond the world of sports. You have to be committed. Coach Giacoletti talked about the team investing in itself because it's your team. When I do the radio show, it's got my name on it. So it better be good. When you commit yourself, fully commit yourself to what you're doing. Don't do it halfway. Fully commit yourself to everything you do because it's you. If you don't fully commit yourself, you've not only cheated yourself, but you've cheated people around you. You can have, I keep using basketball as an example because I'm around it more. If 4 players are doing the job, but one isn't, guess what? You're not going to be very successful because somebody can mess it up. Or just like, for example, on a football team. If somebody doesn't connect on his block, you might have a sack. That's called commitment. Tom Davis, in his last year at Drake, we were on the road with the Bulldogs, and he saw 2 players that were frustrating him. And he ordered them out of practice, said, why don't you guys sit over there because you're not doing us any good. So I think he was testing them to see how they were going to live up to this. How were they going to fight back? One of them, nice kid, unfortunately, never fought back from this, ended up leaving at the end of the year. He transferred. The other kid decided, you know what, I'm going to get back in the rotation. I'm going to fight my way back on this team. He got back in the rotation. He became a starter the next year on that 28-5 team. His name was Leonard Houston, number 5. He could have easily said, I can't make this happen. But he said, I'm going to fight back. And he committed himself to being the best he could be. And he became one of the starters on Drake's, one of Drake's most famous teams. That's commitment. That's investing of yourself. I don't know if you've ever read the book. I keep bringing up books, but Jay Billis wrote a book called Toughness. Jay, of course, is from ESPN, college basketball analyst, probably the best out there. He wrote a book called Toughness. And he says right off the bat, he says, toughness isn't this, beating your chest and I'm bad. And that's not toughness. Toughness is right there. We saw several great examples during the basketball season. Look at Iowa State and under Fred Hoiberg. They got behind a lot of games by double digits early in the games, but more often than not, they fought back and they won those games. And when we would interview either Fred or Matt Abdemessa, who was a weekly guest on our show, he would talk about our most important quality on this basketball team is toughness. We're tough. We know how to win. We know how to fight through. And that's how they ended up getting to the Sweet 16 in the NCAA tournament and giving Connecticut its best battle before they won the title. Conversely, look at the University of Iowa. Fran McCaffrey always talked about a lack of toughness on this team, or at least a couple times. He'd bring up a lack of toughness because what happened with the Hawks? Started out undefeated, and then they lost games they shouldn't have lost to Villanova in the Bahamas. They lost to Iowa State in the game that they were ahead most of the game. They lost a bunch of games down the stretch. Why? Leadership was lacking. They didn't have toughness. Toughness is the ability to finish the job. Get the job done. If you start something, finish it. When you start something and you finish the job, you feel so good. I know one of the things and Deb knows this, I'm lousy when it comes to being handy at all. I mean, I'm just terrible. I'm not handy in the least. But I put together a coat rack. And when I did it, I was like, wow, I did this. I finished it. How good do I feel? And it's just a great feeling to finish the job, get it done. Because if you don't finish the job, you kind of wasted a lot of time starting something but not finishing. So finish the job. That's one area of toughness. Another one is digging down and finding those things inside you that maybe you didn't know you had. Aaron Hawley played on Drake's team for 3 years under Mark Phelps, and then there was a rift between he and the coaching staff, and I think it was a mutual decision. He didn't come back for his senior year. And that was a shame because he was a nice kid, but it didn't work out between the coaching staff and he. So what happened was that last year, when the new coaching staff came in, Jeff Rutter, who'd been an assistant at Iowa State, saw him working in the gym, remembered him from his days at Iowa State, and called him over and said, Aaron, you're a heck of a player. How'd you like to come back and play for us? Play your senior year here. Because they were still looking for players with a new staff. They didn't have time for a full recruiting class. So he said, sure. He jumped at the opportunity to finish on a better note than he left. Otherwise, he'd have left with a very sour taste in his mouth. Aaron Hawley came back, but he was challenged because everybody knew Aaron Hawley could shoot the ball. But he was not a good defensive player, and he didn't get any rebounds. He was pretty much one-dimensional player. Well, he was challenged. We need you to play better defense. We need you to get rebounds. Aaron Hawley worked his butt off last year, and he became a better defensive player. Never be a member of the all-conference defensive team, but he got better. But he did lead the Bulldogs in rebounding several times and was the third leading rebounder on the team. And that's because he had it within him, but maybe he didn't know that he had it within him. And I know fans didn't know it either. Fans like, whoa, that's Aaron Hawley getting those rebounds? Are you kidding me? He dug deep to find what was inside him. Each of us can do that. There may be something we're not sure we have. We can dig down deep and we can find it in everything we do. Maybe get an extra sale here and there. Do something that you have never done. Challenge yourself. He was challenged. He was successful. You can do that too. And when I think of challenges, I think of one of my favorite athletes of all time. And some of you may remember her. I don't know how many of you have ever heard the name Sheila Holsworth. Sheila Holsworth, and this goes back a ways, so back to my days at WHO in the 80s. Sheila Holsworth was a young lady who lost her sight at the age of 10. And she could have felt sorry for herself and gone into self-pity and, oh, woe is me, how did this happen, and what am I going to do now? But she didn't. Instead, she picked up the motto called Seize the Moment. And she said, I'm not going to feel sorry for myself. I still want to accomplish a lot. You know what she accomplished? She was the first blind woman to scale Mount Rainier. She won Olympic gold medals in snow ski and in water ski. She rode horses. She ran track. She rode a motorcycle around the block just to see if she could do it. Sheila Holsworth was amazing. Now, she passed away, unfortunately, this past year, and I feel bad because I had not made contact with her. But when I think of Sheila Holsworth, man, I just think of somebody who could have easily said, I've got this disability, and I can't accomplish this. But she said, I'm not going to let that stop me. I'm going to fight. I'm going to overcome that disability. And she did. And she lived a full life. Finally, when all the work is done, And I know Coach Giacoletti said this to the players a few times last year. He says, you guys have practiced hard. You guys have done a great job in practice. Now it's time for the game. Go have fun. It's a game. Go have fun. Play the game. Enjoy. You've worked hard. You've earned it. Play the game. Let's go have fun with our lives. I know sometimes it's tough to get up. When I did morning radio, oh my goodness. Getting up at 4:45, are you kidding? Oh my goodness. But I know it's tough sometimes to drag yourself into work, but you might as well go in with a positive attitude because it makes the day go faster. It makes you work better. And again, and I keep bringing up sales, but because everything we do is sales. When I'm in radio, I'm still selling. I'm selling myself. But if I go in with a positive attitude, I'm more likely to get a sale than if I'm grumpy. People want to be around people with positive attitudes. Nobody wants to be around a grumpy Gus. Everybody wants to be around people with a positive attitude. So go into life with a positive attitude. You know, Andy Garment, I mentioned Andy because his father passed away last week. And Andy came back this week and told a story. And he mentioned that his father had 4 words. There's not enough time. There's not enough time. Because there's so much we want to accomplish. There's never enough time. I'm sorry. There's never enough time. So live your life to the fullest. So in summary, just remember these things that I've talked to you about. Focus on the things in which you can control. Trust yourself, believe in yourself, and trust others. Make a commitment. If you're going to do something, commit yourself to being the best you can be. Toughness. You have it. Dig deep. Find what's deep inside you because you can bring it out. Again, it's a part of believing in yourself and overcoming adversity because we all have that. And then, finally, have fun. And I really believe if you follow these simple values that come from the world of sports, you'll just be getting better every day. I thank you for listening. If you have any questions, any comments, I'm here. Heidi, thank you.